They'll sell the house and they'll take on an even bigger mortgage and they'll restart the debt trap from year one. That is the reality. But it actually gets even worse because when do you pay your mortgage? Some people, we always get comments, some people say, I pay mine weekly, I pay mine fortnightly, I do mine monthly. The reality is we pay for our mortgage after tax. And so what this means is for you to make your repayments on that $100,000 loan, well, you actually have to earn about $298,000 to pay the $105,000 in tax, to have the $193,000 in after-tax dollars just to pay that $100,000 loan. So you need about 3 times the original amount that you set out to borrow, which means on a $300,000 mortgage, you need to earn about $900,000. But let's pause, because I'm sure with everyone watching today, there's going to be a majority of you right now who have your own mortgage, who are making these repayments. Maybe you've never sat down and thought about it like this. Maybe you've just done exactly what we talked about and you've sold and you've upgraded your home and you're going, oh no, what have we done? Have a second of reflection on your own numbers. And as you do, I want you to remember your integrated strategy solution. Because in order for you to get ahead, you need to decrease your personal debt, minimize your tax legally, and have assets accumulating in value as you work. Now, we talk about real estate assets here at JDL at Just Do Life Strategies because number one, you're going to get a solid cash flow. So property actually generates you a weekly return, which is in the form of rent. Number two is this gives you access to tax minimization strategies. The government will allow you to claim various tax concessions depending on what asset you invest into. Number three, and most importantly, you're going to gain access to what's called leverageability. So the banks will lend to you up to 90% of the value of that asset. If you're in an approved occupation, you won't pay lender's mortgage insurance. If you're not, you can borrow up to 80% without paying lender's mortgage insurance. And number four is the growth element. So we're looking at historical data and future indicators. And so if you're wondering, well, what is that historical data? What are those indicators? Well, that's exactly what I want to start discussing. Let's look at Australian real estate as an asset class, and let's look at what fundamentally underpins it. Starting with our population growth and our migration. Now, if you've been living under a rock lately, you probably haven't heard, but Anthony Albanese has actually opened up the borders and we have had record levels of migration in this country. And we're actually predicted to hit a population of about 30 million people in the next 11 to 15 years. I would actually argue that it's going to happen in the next 10 years based on the new data that's come out. So that's almost a 15% increase in just the decade to come. So almost one new person for every 5 that are currently in existence. But where are those people coming from? Well, the majority of our overseas immigration contribute to our new population. So as a nation, we've opened up our borders for record high levels of skilled immigration. And this is key because skilled immigration are approved occupational visa holders to move straight into the country to start working. So these are doctors, these are dentists, these are teachers. These are people in those occupations where we are desperately crying out for more skilled workers. Because when we look at employment, we're sitting right now at an unemployment rate of only 3.6%, which is almost historically low levels of unemployment. And how bad is our skills shortage in Australia? I've got 3 sets of data here for you. Number one, when we look at the ABS data, they indicate that 1/3 of all businesses right now are actually struggling to find workers. When we look at the NAB, their metrics actually paint a starker picture. So they think 53% of businesses right now are having difficulty hiring. And if we look at the Hayes Salary Guide, they're reporting 88% of businesses are suffering from a skills shortage. This is why we need more skilled workers coming into this country, because we do not have enough jobs right now. Sorry, we do not have enough workers right now to fill those important jobs. But what happens when you bring in more population to the property market? Well, when we look at a real estate market supply, the NHFIC, which is the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, they expect that we're going to see a supply-demand dynamic to remain positive at the national level through until the end of next year, and then we're going to fall into major negative territory. You can see here, from 2023 onwards, we're going to hit some negatives. Ken Morrison, who is the Chief Executive of the Property Council of Australia, when he extrapolated this data, he said the following: this report clearly shows that between 2025 and 2032, Australia will find itself 163,000 homes short of expected demand. Now, that's an average deficit of 20,000 homes every year from now until 2032. So at a time when housing affordability is front of mind for many Australians, the last thing that we can afford is to have planning constraints and supply constraints putting further upward pressure on rents and prices. So the next decade is looking like a major undersupply. And the NHFIC, they actually re-reviewed their own numbers, and they painted an even starker picture right now. They believe that from this year, the end of this year, start of next year, we are going to see a major undersupply of housing. So we're going to build minus 50,000 homes that are required for the new population coming in and the new supply that we need just to house all the new Australians coming into this country. So this structural supply-demand imbalance is likely going to support price increases. This is important when you're an investor, if you're investing into real estate, understanding these crucial numbers. Because when we look at the last 50 years at the historical data, from 1970 to 2022, you can see house prices went from around $20,000 for a house, depending on your city, up to $600, $700, $1 million as a median house price over a 50-year period. So what's going to happen over the next 50 years? That's the question to ask. Now, of course, as an investor, one of the main things that we're worried about is, well, what happens if my house doesn't rent? What happens if I can't get tenants? Well, it's very important to assess the vacancy rate. And we can assess the vacancy rate from a national and also from a capital city perspective. When we look at the numbers, right now, we are sitting at a 0.9% vacancy rate nationwide. So what does this mean? It means that 99.1% of all rental properties in the country are rented out. And if you look at the cities, you can see Sydney 1%, Melbourne 1%, Perth and Adelaide 0.3%. 99.7% of all properties are rented in those cities. And this is actually shown when you look at the total number of dwellings for the country. For the whole of Australia, there are only 21,000 vacancies across the country. So let me ask this. How can we house an extra 4 million people in this country over the next 10 years when we have so few properties available for rent right now? What do we think is going to happen? Do we think prices for rents are going to increase? I'll let you decide that one. Now, of course, on the flip side of that, we also need to factor in, well, what do the banks say? So we reached historically low level of interest rates during the pandemic. In fact, we got down to almost 0%. Now, after 11 basis point rises, the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, have raised their cash rate to now sit at 4.1%. What is the cash rate? What does that mean? Well, the cash rate, remember how I spoke about the interest component that the banks want to earn? The cash rate is what the RBA lends the money to the banks at. So then the banks will put their own profit margin on top of this rate so they can collect that interest. But where do we think we're going to go? Well, the CBA think we've got one more rate rise to 4.35%, possibly going to 4.6%, but dropping to 3.1% over 2024. ANZ think we'll hit a peak of 4.35% and stay steady. The NAB said a peak of 4.6 dropping to 3.1 by the end of 2024. And Westpac also thinks the same. So yes, interest rates are quite high right now, but the four banks are predicting we're going to start seeing easements happening over the next 12 to 24 months. And what do we think is going to happen to prices? Because if buyers are out there right now waiting for interest rates to come down before they start looking for a new house, well, as soon as that happens, we're going to start seeing prices rise because the market will be flooded with new demand and a diminished supply. So let's now go back to the investment side of things for how average income earners can become wealthy through investments. And it all comes down to who's actually helping you hold the investment property. So when we're looking especially at a brand new property, we can see here that the tenant is going to show up and pay for 50% of the bills. They're going to pay for the majority of it. The tax man is then going to come and contribute about 35% of the bills, meaning that your share in owning that property could be 15% or less. And that really is the missing link. That's really the integration that we talk about. Because you need the ability to integrate these three elements, investing, debt reduction, and tax planning, in order to be able to put in place a systematic, simple, safe, and easy to understand, repeatable model that's going to help you create a large asset base without the hard work. What's the solution? Well, the big missing link in this whole picture is your ability to integrate investing, debt reduction, and tax planning. Guys, I cannot say that enough. But I'm not just going to say it, I'm going to show you the system. Let me show you to you. Let me show you what a JDL chain reaction strategy looks like. Here we are. The first property we see, this is your home. Now, the number one goal for your home is we need to reduce that personal debt. But we also want to use that leverageability to utilize equity out of the home to invest into a second property. Now, notice the golden ring around your asset, around your home. This is a finance firewall to protect the home. This is where you're living. You want to make sure that home is protected. Now, over time, as your first investment property starts to increase in value, we can utilize the equity to get a third property, then a fourth, and finally, a fifth property. But what happens over time is those properties, as time goes by, they become more cash flow positive. So step one is utilize that extra cash flow to pay down the personal debt faster. But once that personal debt's gone, well, now you can utilize the income, the extra rent, to start investing into other assets, maybe into managed funds, putting it into your shares, into your superannuation. So that's why we say a chain reaction strategy is houses that buy houses, then those houses buy everything else. But this is not a short-term plan. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a 30-year plan that we're looking to build. And I want to show you how the results look with one of our case studies. So I'm going to bring up for you now our two brothers. So John and Paul. Of course, John and Paul, they're married. So John and Mary, Paul and Susan. Now, they actually owned a company together and were paying themselves the same incomes. but both their families are on a combined before-tax income of $190,000 per annum. They actually bought houses